The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. Yep, we're coming to you live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and, of course, our worldwide family of broadcast affiliates right across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean. I was listening to my show on the refeeds when Laura and I were down in Mexico earlier this year. And, of course, we're heard throughout the Pacific Rim, Asia, India, Africa, and Europe. Worldwide toll-free, 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is Brian Griffith. And Brian grew up in Texas, studied history at the University of Alberta, and now lives just outside of Toronto. He is an independent historian who examines how cultural history influences our lives and how collective experiences offer insights for our future. He is the author of The Garden of Their Dreams, Dissertation and Culture in World History, Different Views, Visions of Love, Partnership, and Denominator Values in Christian History, and Correcting Jesus, 2,000 Years of Changing the Story. And Brian, welcome to the X-Zone.
Hello, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about where your interest came into the type of books that you write and your love for history.
Well, I think I've had a mental mix-up from living in several places. As you say, I grew up in Texas with all the culture wars over Jesus and the American way. Mm-hmm. And then I lived in India, where they have a lot of goddess religions, and in Kenya, where it seems like the men are the bosses and the women are the real leaders. And then I ended up in Toronto, where everything gets mixed together. So, I've put out recently one book about correcting Jesus, and the other one about Chinese goddesses. So, I mean, as a Western man, I always thought religion was a mainly male thing, because the gods and priests and rabbis and the mullahs that I knew all seemed to be male. And I heard there used to be women's religions, like the pre-Christian pagan religions or the cults of witches, but those were stamped out as superstitious nonsense a long time ago by whatever means necessary. So basically, both the goddesses and female leaders were, for a long time, eliminated from religion in the West, and I got to wondering what religion would look like if women made it, and how would they do it different? And, of course, the answer to that was staring us in the face, because across India and China and much of the world, there's big popular goddess religions that are alive today, and we can just look at them and see how they're different.
How many different religions are there in the world today?
I don't know. It's an incredible number, and I don't really know how to add them up because, for example, looking at the Chinese goddess religions, there's, some of them have 100 or up to 500 million devotees in the world, but they're not normally added together as if that was a religion. And they cross over a lot. A lot of these Chinese goddesses are they're revered in several different religions spread out all over that part of the world.
Gotcha. Brian, you and I have to take a commercial break. Please stand by. Great talking to you, and it's nice talking to somebody here in Ontario. Brian Griffith is our special guest this hour, X-Zone Nation. Here's the website I'd like you to go to if you'd like to buy any of Brian's books or find out more about Brian. His website is www.exterminatingangel.com. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. Brian Griffith and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue from our studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
We all desire health, happiness, and fulfillment, but often get in our own way. Repeated patterns that leave us out of control can keep us feeling powerless, frustrated, and unable to move forward in spite of our best efforts. Unconscious patterning disconnects us from our gifts, often destroying the very thing we seek. But there is an answer. We can take charge of our destiny and heal the trauma of our history. Shamanism is an effective ancient modality that can reconnect us with our true selves, empower the creation of our dreams, and return us to health and balance. Cody Alexander is a certified shamanic practitioner and teacher with 11 years' experience. Email healingpathways33@gmail.com or visit codyalexander.net to schedule a long-distance shamanic session today.
Welcome back, everyone. My guest is Brian Griffith, and before we get back to Brian, I'd just like to spread some news with you, members of the X-Zone Nation worldwide. You are now able to go to Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk and buy the X Chronicles newspaper each and every month in print. That's right. You can go to Amazon.com and buy the X Chronicles newspaper for, June. The July-August is going to be there. The August-September issue is going to be there. We're going to be doing this every month. Plus, now here's a biggie. We are in the middle now of editing three books that have the entire history, the historical volumes of the X Chronicles newspaper going back to, the first edition was October 1992 and every month thereafter. So you'll be able to get the X Chronicles now online. You'll get the X Chronicles newspaper in print. We sell the X Chronicles on a DVD book. No matter how you want to now get your edition of the X Chronicles newspaper, it's done for you. You, the X-Zone Nation, have asked for it, and we have done our best to make sure that we take care of you. By the way, there's a new Relmar website at www.rel-mar.com. Same domain name that we've had for 10 years now. Totally new look. My guest this hour is Brian Griffith, and Brian and I are talking about religion. We're talking about goddesses. We're talking about correcting Jesus, or the story or the information about Jesus. And Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great talking to you.
Thank you.
But, you know, when people talk about goddesses, they usually think of, all right, it has something to do with witchcraft and Wicca or New Age spirituality or Egyptology. But it's much broader than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's there was a stigmatization of the women's religions, but this is basically religions that grow out of women's experience, and I'm curious about how that would be, because in Western history we pretty much purged that side of the story from things for a long time, and that's why I'm interested in looking at places where all through history there's been big women's religions going on, and they were never stamped out. They never had witch hunts to get rid of the village wise women. They're still there, and they're still popular. So if you look at like Chinese women's religions, of course we can't generalize that Chinese women have certain qualities or anything, but in their popular traditions, there's certain values that I think we can see are common. They tend to share certain values. They usually assume a reverence for life and the power to conceive or nurture it, and they commonly take this literally female power as the greatest power of all. So, in China, these religions have always been popular. They're not official religions, but they're popular, and they show the values and ideals that women have respected most. And one example, this is a little bit contradictory to evil sorceresses, and example of the goddess Guan Yin, or Kuan Yin, who's clearly the most popular deity in China for the past 500 years and has maybe 500 million devotees in the world.
Wow.
And unlike many goddesses in world history, she's not a symbol of motherhood or wifely duty or ideal sexuality. She's portrayed as a fully enlightened world savior who's with compassion for all creatures, and of course many worshippers see her as a superior being who's probably made of spiritual matter and who lives in heaven and responds to prayers. But
it almost sounds parallel to how Catholicism looks at the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels. But,
yeah.
The way I like to think of her is like a figure of popular literature. Like, Joseph Campbell would explain that a deity is an image of whatever people feel is the highest and the best in life. And, an image like that can shape people's dreams and goals. And, I think that in a future planetary culture, it's possible that Guan Yin will become just about the most widely respected image of female spirituality in the world. And then, there's thousands of other Chinese goddesses. Some of them are mythical spirits of nature, and others are masters of yoga-like spiritual disciplines, like the Taoist master Sun Bu Er. Some of them are heroic fighting shamanesses like Chen Jinggu and her band of sworn sisters. And a fair number of them have nationwide or global appeal. Like, there's around 100 million devotees of a goddess called Mazu, So that right there is a religion that's vastly larger than Judaism. And, with all the cults of these deified women like Guan Yin, Sun Bu Er, Chen Jinggu, or Mazu were all lumped together, it would count as one of the world's biggest religions.
When we look at Christianity and especially Catholicism and how the Virgin Mary is revered, that's one parallel that you and I have discussed. But in Christianity, in the Bible, it says, "And thou shalt have no other gods before me." Yet you go into certain churches, and all the saints are revered as well. So basically, when we're looking at certain religions that have the saints that are being prayed to, can they be classified as demigods?
Well, in China, probably all the deities. I mean, there's nature deities, but then most of the deities are actually people. They're saint-like or guru-like figures who are just revered. They're like elevated to sainthood by popular demand, and they were acclaimed to be God.
Like Saint Francis of Assisi.
People pray
Right.
to Saint Francis. They say that he intercedes to help them, and so on. But even if there's not magical powers that they appear and so on, still, they're people in history who they're regarded as masters who attained some sort of enlightenment and were teachers. But since the followers can learn what the teachers teach, most of these goddesses and other deities, they're examples to be learned from, not like they're eternally superior beings to be obeyed. In the woman-friendly traditions there, people commonly pictured their deities as ultimate parents or teachers or friends, and not like their kings or lords. And most of them were, flourished among common people rather than the dominant groups. And they seldom had any kind of official status or backing from the government. They were popular, but they didn't usually control any big organizations. And their authority just came from their personal qualities, not from any position of rank or office. So they're called, this is, people make a distinction between organized religion and unorganized religion. So these goddess cults were sort of unorganized, and so they're called popular religion instead of organized religion.
1-800-610-7035 worldwide toll free. This is the X Zone. My name is Rob McConnell. My special guest this hour is Brian Griffith. And if you'd like to find out more about Brian, he's got a website here that I urge you to go to, X Zone Nation, www.exterminatingangel.com. I've got a question for you, Brian, and maybe you can help me shed some light on it. How many gods worldwide are there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's thousands of women in China who are regarded as deified figures, just thousands of them. And it's like India as well. I mean, the countryside is haunted by thousands of people who are regarded as deified or sainted figures. And they're often, you can trace the historic person behind it. Like one example from ancient times in China is a woman called Ti Ying, and she dared challenge the emperor with an appeal for mercy on prisoners. And her boldness won a legal ban on the worst kinds of torture, and she became a goddess in the popular mind.
All right, what we have to do here, Brian, is we have to take a commercial break with the news at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back. Brian, thanks very much for joining us. I look forward to spending the next half hour with you as well. Exonation, Brian Griffiths is our special guest. One of his books is A Galaxy of Immortal Women, The Inside of Chinese Civilization. And we're going to be talking more to Brian about religion, gods, goddesses, and even Jesus Christ himself on the other side of this break. 1-800-610-7035 worldwide toll-free. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. And to Ed Shiflett at Master Control in Orlando, Florida. Ed, nice talking to you, buddy, and look forward to speaking to you soon. By the way, Ed, congratulations on your marriage. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
There's a legend shared by many indigenous cultures of a time when the nations were cast to the four corners of the world. Each nation was given a body of sacred knowledge that held a different portion of the truth to preserve. True reality could not be known until all the nations reunited, combining the information. If a single one was missing, the world could not be reborn and darkness would prevail. The Science of Magic Radio is dedicated to reuniting this sacred knowledge. With the understanding, none of us has all the answers, but together we can open new perceptions and possibilities. Through our combined vision, the world can be reborn into a place where darkness no longer prevails. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic daily on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, or visit us at thescienceofmagic.net.
And welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. Brian Griffiths is my special guest, and for finding out more information about Brian, the books he's written, www.exterminatingangels.com. Brian, you also wrote a book pertaining to Jesus, and the title of that book is what?
Correcting Jesus, 2,000 Years of Changing the Story.
That's a very provocative title. Tell me a little bit about that book.
Well, some people thought that I was presuming to correct Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They took it a little bit about the way they took the title to the satanic verses, where, people thought that the book was calling the Quran the satanic verses, when actually it was referring to some verses that Muhammad said were satanic. Anyway, so some people took it the wrong way, but what I mean is, I think we all have reasons for thinking that the stories about Jesus have been changed over time. Like, as I was growing up in Texas, we believed that Jesus stood for the American way, and he stood for national pride and strong armed forces and free enterprise, and a lot of us also felt sure that he stood for traditional subordinate roles for women, and since I was in an all-white church, a lot of people felt it was a matter of Christian morality to keep the white and black races separate. So we felt sure that we believed in the Bible, but we also heard what we wanted to hear. For example, when we heard that Jesus urged forgiving wrongdoers, but we felt it was stupid to simply forgive offenders because they'd think they could get away with anything. And anyway, I got interested in looking at the changes Christianity's gone through down the centuries. And, for example, back in the days of the Enlightenment, during the French Revolution, the slogan of the revolutionaries was liberty, fraternity, equality. And it seemed like everybody assumed that this was a heretical rejection of everything Christianity ever stood for. And both the church leaders and the anti-Christian rebels accepted the idea that Jesus upheld the divine right of kings. And of course, that raises the question of what Jesus taught about freedom, and the answers to that have been all over the moral map. In the American Revolution, people mostly had the idea that freedom was a Christian thing, but I remember one exchange in my Texas Sunday school class where somebody was saying that real Christians trust the Bible more than human reason, and somebody else in the room replied, then why did Jesus ask, why can't you decide for yourselves what is right? And the answer was, we can't because we're sinners. Anyway, I took to asking, if we look over Christianity as we know it, what cases of officially correcting Jesus can we find on subjects like Judaism, forgiveness, women, freedom, violence, or compassion?
And what answers did you come up with?
Well, I would go, by subject. I've got, a lot about women. They changed a lot about women. So maybe I can just dive in on that. I got
Sure,
a
go
little
right
story
ahead.
about it. I think there's a lot of evidence that Jesus had great respect for women, and judging from the stories in Acts and Paul's letters, it seems like the early Christian movement started out proudly proclaiming the equality of men and women. And at first, Paul was proudly saluting the female leaders of almost every church he helped found across Turkey and Greece. In Philippi, the leader was Lydia. In Colossia, it was Nympha. In Corinth, it was Chloe. In Philemon's town, it was Apphia. In Philippi, there was 2 female church leaders. And anyway, in the books of Acts and Romans, it's full of praise of the women's female preachers. And then Paul and the later church leaders changed their tune. They started demanding that the women must shut up and wear head covering. And, so why the big change? And I think the evidence is that they were dealing with ridicule from the surrounding society. And we have record of pagan critics ridiculing the Christians as a movement where the man had lost all control of women. And these ancient people usually assumed that if women were not controlled, then all the standards of morality would be tossed to the wind. And so to prove that they were a respectable religion, the leading men needed to demonstrate that they were in charge. And then, instead of preaching a new order where all would be equal, they started insisting that all the traditions of inequality in the ancient Middle East had to remain in force for women. And, they even altered the text of Scripture to reinforce this. The copyists changed 1 Corinthians to make Paul say, "It is a good thing for a man to have nothing to do with a woman." And in the New English Bible, there's a footnote to this verse that says that the earlier versions of the text were written differently. And the older versions said, "You Corinthians say it is a good thing for a man to have nothing to do with a woman, but because there's so much immorality, let each man have his own wife," etc. So in the original version, Paul was criticizing other people for advocating sexual segregation in the church. But his defense of families working together disappeared with the simple deletion of a phrase, and in its place stood a corrected statement of naked contempt for all women. And then, reading the corrected text, St. Jerome explained, "If it's good not to touch a woman, it is bad to touch one, for there is no opposite of goodness but badness." And this trend, it intensified with time. First, the women were drummed out of all the leadership and teaching roles. Then they lost their roles managing the church charities. And next, the issue rose of whether the purity of the priests would be compromised by being married to women.
Is that where the celibacy comes in? Because
they started arguing.
Yeah, because as you and I both know, there's no mention within the Bible that a priest has to be celibate.
Right, and the Council of Nicaea argued this in 325, and they made a ruling that's quite interesting. They ruled that if any priest divorced his wife and threw out his family on the pretext of piety, then that priest should be thrown out of the church. And so for hundreds of years, most priests remained married down to the year 1074. And that's when the church overthrew the Council of Nicaea rule, and instead they demanded that all the priests must divorce their wives or else lose their jobs. And we can call this the greatest mass divorce in world history. And then, after throwing out all the church wives, the clerical heads went after the remaining female leaders in secular society to remove the village wise women in the witch hunts. And fortunately, just when it seemed like relations between men and women couldn't really get worse, it started going the other way. And a big part of this was the nuns who had been confined to the cloister to protect their chastity, but they began refusing their enclosure orders and going out to handle problems in the streets. And they founded our modern service institutions, our schools, our hospitals. They gave education to girls. And, nothing so revived the Catholic Church after the Protestant revolt as the female religious orders. And they saw themselves as caring servants rather than godly masters of society. And they showed what the church would have been from the first if women hadn't been forcefully barred from partnership in its mission.
So can we say that it's because of this religious, because of religion itself, that women were forced to take a second seat, and it's only because of the male ego that was so prevalent back in those days?
Well, the history of Christianity and Islam are fairly parallel on this. They start out with being righteous about equal rights for people. The first Muslim women were business managers, religious leaders, generals in the army, and then they get this blowback to the tradition from before and reestablish all the ancient prejudices that the religion started out as a protest against. So, they betray their own values and go back to ancient prejudices.
Unbelievable. Where do you see religion going in the future, Ted? As a historian, has it come to the point of our sociological development that religion is no longer required?
Well, I think that religion is something that everybody has. Everybody has their sense of where they're going and what's important and where life comes from and what's it heading toward and therefore what's good and helpful and what's not. Everybody has their sense of that. And so I think that's inherently religion right there. And everyone has it in some way.
Yes.
And everybody has their own sense of it. I mean, if I say that I'm a Christian, that doesn't really tell you very much about my own sense of what's important in life and where I'm going in life. So I think it's not like we're going to get rid of religion. I think people are going to do it with less a herd mentality. They're going to think for themselves, what's my aim in life and what works in getting there, So I think we're going to have a little more individual accountability rather than just following the herd on these things.
What is your I should say that you and I were talking before during the commercial break with the news, and you actually did a lineage, I believe, when it comes to Jesus, and you and I were talking about the number of fathers that he had.
Oh, well, they put several myths together. They say he was born of God, but then they give the lineage of his father Joseph going back with all the fathers of Joseph, and they give the whole lineage going all the way back to Adam, and then it says Adam was the son of God. Well, so, I mean, basically one way or the other, everybody on the whole lineage was a son of God, and Jesus talked about God as our Father.
Yes.
So, and it's, the same with the Bible. People collect all these stories from an ancient country of Israel, and they say this is the story of God's people and God's country. And, you could say the same thing about a history book of, say, America, because a lot of people think that America's God's country and it's God's people. And since everybody's God's people, it's basically true.
All right, stand by, Brian. You and I have to take our final break. Brian Griffith is our special guest of this hour, X-Zone Nation. Interesting gentleman with an interesting topic. www.exterminatingangel.com. And Brian and I will be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant, check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A Soul Balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
That's what we're trying to do here this hour, give you something to talk about. My guest is Brian Griffiths. His website is www.eliminatingangel.com. I'm sorry, exterminatingangel.com. Brian, so as a historian, is there any historical proof beside biblical accounts that Jesus really did exist?
Well, I guess not, but I find it hard to really worry about that. And in other religions around the world, people don't think that their tradition hangs on that kind of thing. Like, we could say the same thing about Buddhism. We could say, do we have really any record that the Buddha ever existed? And, but there's this whole tradition of teaching and everything that's there. It's a reality in the world, and its validity does not depend on proving, that the historical Krishna really lived at a certain date, or the birth certificate of Buddha. I think that when people argue about the Bible, it often seems like an invalidation contest where either the book is completely inerrant or else it's complete garbage. But the Second Vatican Council in the 60s actually urged a middle path that's commonsensical on this, and it said, these books, even though they contain material which is imperfect and obsolete, nevertheless bear witness to truly divine teachings.
But isn't that a bit of a hypocritical paradox that religion has been expecting us to swallow all these years? Because they teach truth, they teach justice, they teach us not to lie, and yet if there's nothing to evidence the basis of the religion, how can they expect us to be honest when they themselves aren't?
Well, my grandparents rejected a religion, and they rejected it, and a lot of people around the world rejected the people of the Chinese Revolution, just rejected religion as they knew it. And they rejected it because it didn't live up to its own values, which means that they basically believed in those kind of values themselves, and they wanted some integrity in holding to those values, and they were just criticizing people for being hypocritical about it.
Brian, I'd love to continue this, but we've run out of time for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us. X-Zone Nation, Brian Griffiths has been my guest. Check out his website, www.exterminatingangel.com. That's www.exterminatingangel.com. And I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as the X-Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.